The following presentation was recorded live in Las Vegas, Nevada for the 27th Annual International Association of Square Dance Callers. This is Tape 6, PPC Open Forum.
If we could just move into the seats, if you're going to be with us for the session, or any significant portion thereof. We'll get ready to start here in just a couple of minutes. Larry Davenport, if you're in the room, come on down front, would you please? Well, you can hardly make any humorous comments today without offending somebody, and I'm not so sure I have yet, but I know I will. However, I do want to acknowledge the fact, no one brought this to my attention, but I do want to acknowledge the fact that alcoholism is a very serious disease, and many people are suffering from it, and it really should not be, perhaps, a topic of humor. That being said, if you were offended by my comments about being an alcoholic, rest assured I am not, yet.
Are you in denial?
And whoever called my... Yeah. One day at a time. Whoever called my wife and let her know that I was abstaining from alcohol, please don't call her again. I'd like to take a moment here to introduce the, first of all, let you know what the formal name of this committee is. My name is KIP, and this is the BOG PPC. The Board of Governors Program Policy Committee. The committee began with the title of Program Coordinating Committee in 1982. It subsequently became a Board of Governors Program Policy Committee because, unlike other committees, it serves a very special function in that it helps coordinate the efforts of existing standing committees, namely our dance program committees, the Basic Mainstream Committee, the Plus Committee, the Advanced Committee, and the Challenge Committee. The members of the PPC, the BOG PPC, are therefore the chairpersons and the vice chairpersons of the respective dance committees, which I'd like to introduce them, the ones who are here with us anyway, right now. For the Mainstream Committee, our chairman is Dana Shermer. Raise your hand, Dana, so they know where to fire the bullets. The Plus Committee is chaired by Larry Davenport, who I was hoping would be here, and the vice chairman is Skip Brown. The Advanced Dancing Committee is chaired by Bob Stern, who couldn't be with us this convention, but is represented by the vice chairman, Cliff Simpson. And the Challenge Committee has a single chairman, Ed Foote. Vic Cedar is also the vice chairman of the... Have I been appraised of all this? Of the Challenge Committee. Yes, I guess I have, haven't I? Now, that explains more or less what the PPC is. What does it actually do? Well, it coordinates the efforts of the various programs so that there are a minimum of conflicts between definitions of calls, especially. So that if a call is defined one way in one program and another way in a subsequent program, if there's a conflict within that definition, the resolution is worked out between the members of the PPC and offered to the respective dance programs for reconciliation. This does happen. For instance, right now we're in the process of figuring out what we're really going to do with partner tag. Many of our definitions in various dance programs contain the phrase partner tag, and the call itself was dropped from the Plus program, was it 2 years ago? More than that, had to be 4 years ago then. Right. From Mainstream, that's absolutely right. Right. And so our committee attempts to resolve that. The Board of Governors sent us a directive about 2 years ago, knowing we were headed along the lines of marketing for a new frontier, knowing we're going into the new century, we really want to be sure that the dance programs that we've established are what we want to work with for the next decade or more. We want to be sure that they're applicable. We want to be sure that the callers are comfortable with them. And we want to get rid of, as much as possible, this every 5, 6, or 7 years having this committee of the whole, ad hoc, big idea that we're going to take an entire convention on a Wednesday morning and argue these massive changes to our dance programs, which, quite frankly, have not been well thought out in the past. Last year was an eye-opener for us with Target 2000. We realized that that vote told us more than whether or not you were comfortable or we're all comfortable with our dance programs. It told us that half the membership is and half the membership isn't. That's probably the worst case scenario, to be split down the middle in something as critical as our dance programs when we're heading into an era where we want things to be stable, especially with the product that we intend to market, or one of the products that we intend to market, and that's the content of the dance programs. So the Board of Governors asked us if we would review existing policy that's been in place since 1992 that governs the way each dance committee selects the calls, the biennial review process, how the voting is conducted, how the calls will be defined, which committee handles what. The overall structure has to be firm and in place. You picture it as the foundation of all of our dance programs. The policies that are in place, as long as there's a strong rationale for them, as long as they're well thought out and well designed, we can work within that framework for many, many years down the road and not have to worry about a massive change to dance programs. Now, in order to understand a little bit better what we're offering to you today, we need to go back into history, back to the 1970s, when our dance programs were first formulated. How many of you in this room have become a CALLERLAB member since 1985, after 1985? You missed all the fun. I say that in jest, but in reality, the early years of our convention, we spent a whole lot of time trying to determine what the appropriate dance program would be, especially for our entry dancers. That was critical. Let me turn to the right page here so I get my chronology correct. Oh, by the way, I had a copy of this for you guys. I'll get it to you by Monday or Tuesday. There were 25 individuals who began CALLERLAB, if you will. That's one reason why our Board of Governors today contains 25 members. They came to the first CALLERLAB convention knowing that we had to have a dance program. And they already knew the name of it. It was mainstream. But they didn't have any idea of what the content would be. They had some idea. They were going to launch off of the sets in order 50 and 75 basics. But the key was, can we get the callers around the world at the time to accept this idea, this concept of a mainstream program? And that was the focus. How many calls were being called and taught at that time period? Amazingly, it's about the same number as dancers need to know now, between 90 and 100 calls. That hasn't changed. Let me give you a quote, and you try to tie a time to this. I'm going to leave some of the quote out, but listen to this. Square dancing must have its particular language and set of rules. Is it not time for square dancers to realize that the set of rules must be limited to a number of basics that newer dancers can learn in a reasonable time? Some see that square dancing has been allowed to become an activity seemingly dedicated to more and better basics, more and more variety, more and more challenge. Unfortunately, the inevitable result has been more and better problems, more and more disillusioned beginners, and more lost dancers. Anybody want to put a year on that? That was a quote from Dawson Bell's textbook called The Keys to Calling, printed in 1961. And they go on to list the calls of the day in 1961 that they were agonizing over. Some of the basics. There were various basic lists around, but the one that received the most, what's the word I'm looking for? The most used and the most acceptance was the Sets in Order Basics 50 and Basic 75. And that should tell you something. Basic 50 and Extended Basic 75. Da-da-dee, da-da-da. How many items are there? 2. 2 dance programs, if you will. They expected the dancers to learn a subset of calls, 50 of them, which allowed them to enter this recreation called square dancing. And then there was another 25 calls that they would learn along the way. The concept is clear. That's what we're here to discuss today. Concepts about how dance programs should be structured. Now, going back to this resolution that's in front of you, some of you may have read it, and if you read it really quickly, it looks pretty benign. There's not much in there you can argue about. Others picked it up and read it and said, my God, this is missing, that's missing, this is something different. And they're willing to offer some argument, I guarantee you. I think you're going to hear it pretty soon. But there are 4 characteristics of this resolution in establishing these dance programs and the policies that govern them. There are 4 characteristics that we have wrestled with for over 2 years. And it's notable for me to mention at this point that the Program Policy Committee does not vote on anything and pass resolutions. We don't do that. All we do is we do the study work, the research, and we pass the recommendations on to our immediate governing body, the Board of Governors, who then sits down and decides, yes, this is good, no, this is bad, we accept this, we don't accept that. This policy that you see in front of you, by the way, has been accepted by the Board of Governors. Not very easily, but it has been. One thing, a very distinct difference that's offered by this policy is a single entry dance program. In order to understand why we came to this conclusion, you really need to know how these dance programs came about to begin with. Mainstream was developed. It had 62 calls, 63 calls in it, and it never was enough. 1976, 1977, 1978 conventions. Time was spent by people saying, I need more. There are more calls that we need. But which calls should we choose? There was a plethora of calls at the time. And areas in the East Coast and the West Coast and the Central States and even in our overseas associates, everybody was doing something different at the time. We needed a mechanism to select what the additional calls would be. The mechanism was the quarterly selection process. That was the mechanism, and it was put into place to try to decide what programs would follow mainstream. Does anybody want to venture a guess as to what the first programs were actually called that followed mainstream? Don't bother, because it shocked me too. It was called the Mainstream Plus Standard Applications Program, and the Mainstream Plus All Position Dancing. It lived for a generous 9 months, I think. At least it lasted through to the next convention, where it was then changed to Mainstream Plus 1, Mainstream Plus 2, and then they spent a whole year deciding whether the 1 and the 2 should be numerals or Roman numerals. And each of those respective dance programs contained 12 calls each. So we had 24 calls, plus the then 69 mainstream calls. Now that grew from 62 to 69, 63 to 69 calls, which didn't make a lot of mainstream callers happy. It made them real edgy. How big is this mainstream thing going to get? And so we ran into the process called freezing dance programs, which is the antithesis to having open discussion about debating dance programs and deciding in groups by majority rule what should be. But they froze the mainstream program in 78 for 3 years till 81, and then they froze it again in 81 till 84, which ended up, I think, being a good thing, but at the time, I couldn't understand it at all. The bottom line was that the mainstream program was getting too large, and a lot of the callers viewed it as being our entry program. Our entry program. There were many callers at the time who said it's too big, 69 calls. We can't expect to teach these 69 calls in a reasonable period of time and get people into square dancing. And so a resolution was passed at the Board of Governor level and handed down through direction to all the members that said, we recommend that the mainstream program be comprised of the basics, the extended basics, and then the mainstream. And we encourage all members to develop basic, extended basic programs where they would apply in your own area. So here we were, coming in with an idea of having a single dance program we can all use and ending up with 5 of them. Basic, extended basic, mainstream, mainstream plus 1, and mainstream plus 2. Someone said, which one do I teach? Where do I stop? How far do I go? The answer to that was, do what you think is right in your own area. If you think your dances need plus 1 to enter, thank you, do plus 1. If you think your dances need only basic, do basic. So an evolutionary process was kicked along here. And we're going through a development process. Some guys are calling plus 1. Some guys are calling mainstream. Some callers are calling basic and extended basic. We found out, I think Jim Mayo was the first chairman of the basic committee. Wasn't that so, John? Is that your recollection? Regardless, that committee finally evaporated. No one in the contiguous states, United States, was effectively using a basic program enough to gain visibility as a standalone program. It was being used in Europe. Why? Well, Europe was in a different stage of development with their square dancing. Square dancing was relatively new from the standpoint of they didn't have very many callers and so on, and if you're going to do it, what do? They're non-English speaking in a lot of cases, so they picked up the documents that we were in the process of creating, and they went from there. What's the first one you see? Basic. Okay, we'll teach basic. And that's the way Europe has developed, and that's why we have many overseas associates who use basic as their entry program, but we hardly see it at all here in the United States. Extended basics, it became a transparent line between, a very thin line between basic and extended basics, and what we now call extended basics became the basics. And at least we now back down to 4 dance programs. Plus 1 and plus 2 were later combined, but the 24 calls at the time had turned into 27 calls, I'm sorry. Plus 1 and plus 2 were combined into the plus program. But at least now we had basic, mainstream, and plus. And everything seemed to be rolling along just fine. Until we ran into 1984. 1984, there was a huge push. I know I was part of it. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I don't offer apologies. I try to work within the system. I had developed a dance program called the Bay Area Teaching Order. Bill Davis had developed a separate teaching process called the LISST, the LIST. The acronym stands for the Logical Integrated Single Season Teaching, which was put into effect by the Santa Clara Valley Callers, I believe, in 1986, maybe 84, maybe sooner. And was it 86? Bottom line is, it created havoc in California. Absolute havoc. We had a state convention held in Sacramento. And the people who programmed it. The people who programmed it were familiar with the list. They programmed a lot of the halls as being the equivalent of LISST. And a lot of the clubs that were doing basic mainstream at the time had no place to dance at the state convention. So in our struggle for standardization, we were really tossing a lot of standardization right out the window. In the process of trying to find a way that the West Coast could teach people more calls And New England could teach the people more calls. They had their own thing going on called the level system. We were drifting farther and farther away from standardization. To avoid this, we developed a policy, not really a policy, but a program called the 25-week Learn to Dance program. Anybody remember that? It never got off the ground. It was a rocket ship fully loaded that never left the pad. It died in 1986. Lo and behold, in 1998, we had another challenge to our dance programs, a serious one called Target 2000. And a lot of you know how I feel personally about dance programs. We've shared our different thoughts. I need to tell you today that we must achieve agreement and standardization on our dance programs, and we must agree to use them the way they're designed. We cannot afford to have professional traveling callers tell us what we should be teaching in our own areas. Professionals built the Titanic. Amateurs built the Ark. With that in mind, we offer this resolution to you that has 4 significant items to it. We're recommending a single entry dance program. We're recommending only 2 dance programs prior to advanced. We're recommending that the size of these dance programs be tied to a single teaching season, which should be defined by the committee that's responsible for managing the dance program. And respective to size, we're also recommending that no program be too small once that season is defined. A program of 17 calls is not really a program. That's what we're saying. It needs to be something that can be reasonably taught in a single dance season. And the 4th item regarding this policy, and it's all worded in there if you can dig it out, is that dance program management shall remain the prerogative and the responsibility of the respective dance programs. We should avoid, if at all possible, the ad hoc committee of the whole situation like we had with Target 2000, where we're making dramatic and important decisions to modify our dance programs that affect square dancers around the world. We can't have that. We need a more controlled management of our dance programs. And so we're recommending that that management remain within the dance program committee itself, and that any changes that we need to make should be addressed through that committee. This means that if you have a serious question with mainstream, calls that are on the mainstream program, calls that you feel should be redefined in mainstream, calls that you feel should be off the mainstream program, you don't send a resolution to the Board of Governors suggesting the change. You go through the proper channel, the mainstream committee. You submit your resolution there for consideration. You try to convince enough people to see things your way. You work for the change, and if the change is worthwhile, I guarantee you, I have learned this the hard way, there is nothing stronger than the combined decision-making process of the bodies of this organization. I have learned to have extreme faith in bringing a question to all of this membership and then learning to be satisfied with the answer. I've learned the hard way, but I've learned. And I suggest that you follow the same advice that I give you. The members of this organization are equal in a lot of ways, and we have a tendency to believe that they're not. Every vote is important, every opinion is important, and more importantly, we must stick to the decisions made by this organization, because that's why we're here. Now, with that in mind, I'd like to explain to you why we have taken BASIC, if you will, off of the list as a program. Mainstream is, in our belief, the single most respected and acknowledged plateau of dancing for newer dancers to stop at for the first time. It doesn't mean that the BASIC program is no good. It doesn't mean that you can't continue to use it. It simply means that as far as standardized dance programs are concerned, as far as advertised dance programs are concerned, the first place our dancers go when we teach them to dance is mainstream. Dancers who don't want to continue can stop at mainstream. People who only learn the basics have learned 2/3 of mainstream. That's all that it means. If you want to continue teaching basic program, taking some time off, a 3-month, 6-month relaxation period before you continue, it simply means that according to CALLERLAB policy, your people haven't arrived at a predetermined plateau. They are not there yet. They've got to finish the mainstream before they get there. The fact that we have been unable to encourage many of our members to develop and use the basic program that we designed is significant proof that it's not truly a viable program for everybody. It's really important for some of us, but not for everybody. Okay? The 2 dance programs prior to advanced. Well, folks, it's been with us. We've had 100 calls to deal with that have ranged from 93 to 98 listed calls. People will argue that if you want to talk iterations of calls, that's really 120. And if you want to explode that out to include mirror imaging of right, left, reverse, and so on, that grows to some phenomenal number. But as far as our listed calls go, we've been dealing with 90 calls since 1961. Now that is something that has maintained itself as a fact through all of these program changes. The number of calls that we teach our dancers initially has been about the same. We've also recognized that the first exposure is roughly 60 calls. And it's not exactly, just roughly, somewhere around there. And then the next exposure, once they become proficient at the 60 calls and they want to continue their experience in square dancing and they want to learn more calls, our second program gives them the next batch of about 40 more calls. Now, right now, the balance of those calls is not split that way. Right now, we have 68 calls in mainstream, and we have 29 calls in plus. That might mean that we have to reshift that a little bit. Maybe the 68 calls is too much for mainstream. If we do, these decisions will be made at the mainstream committee level. What will decide this factor? When we finally agree on what a teaching season is at mainstream. Now, that's a difficult question if we all sit down together and we're talking about challenge and advanced and plus and mainstream and trying to come up with one definition of a teaching season. It's almost impossible. It truly is. It's a massive thing to try to decide. But I bet you that we could put that question to the mainstream community and say, how long? How long? What's the minimum recommendation of time stated in numbers of sessions and numbers of hours for our dancers to dance in a single season? Put the list aside. Forget about the calls. How long is that season? That's going to be the first question. If you pass this resolution, that's going to be the first question that each dance committee is going to have to decide. They're going to have to come up with that answer. How long is a teaching season? Once that's decided, the second question that they'll have as a directive from the Board of Governors to resolve will be how many calls can be comfortably taught in that season. And characteristically, they're going to have to consider the nature of the calls. If it's the mainstream program, we have a pretty good idea of what those calls are already. We just have to see, the 68 calls, can they really fit this dance season? If they can, we may not have to change a thing. We can leave it just as it is. But if the hue and cry we've heard over the last 8 years about shorten the teaching time, shorten the season down, shorten the learning process, if that has any truth to it, we'll find out that the mainstream program will have to be pared down. And in our estimate, we've determined that it could be possibly pared down by as many as 9 calls. By the same token, the Plus program has to decide what its teaching season is and how many calls will fit into that Plus program structurally. And does 29 calls, does that do it? And we may decide, no, we've got room to teach 6 more calls, 7 more calls. And over a period of time, we can see that a balance will be achieved between these 2 programs, a balance that we really don't have right now because the Plus program is too short, folks. It's too easy for me to take my graduates and teach them the next 29 calls. I can do it. I really don't want to. And it will help me if that 29 was really 36. It would help me. Now, as far as the evolution process goes, we cannot afford to disrupt what's happening in square dancing today. Our dancers have become accustomed to the calls in their programs. They've been accustomed to the lists. They've been accustomed to the terminology. How do we make effective changes? Well, I don't think you do it at like a Wednesday morning convention meeting where everybody holds up a yellow card and you end up with a 50-49 split. I think the best way to do it is to use our biennial review process. Every 2 years, our dance programs are reviewed anyway, and calls to be included or deleted are considered every 2 years. We sat down and said among ourselves, trying to project this into the future, what will that look like? What would that process possibly look like? How many calls would possibly shift in a 2-year period? And we determined that the maximum number of calls that would shift in any 2-year period would be 3. 3 calls. Is it too much or too little to ask our dancing population to accept a 3-call change over a 2-year period? The answer is no. What's the worst case scenario? Worst case would be that it would take 10 years to change 9 calls. 10 years. Is that acceptable? We believe it is, because we know from conversations we had and some of the experience we had with Target 2000 that some change is needed. What we didn't know was how to do it. And we believe the biennial review process is a mechanism we can use, thank you, to do that. In order to kick this whole thing off, we need the membership to be comfortable with the concepts of the policies that you see in front of you. If you want to go over those policies, you will see there are 9 of them. And I will point to you where each of these 4 significant changes are. Item number 2, basic is gone. The word basic as a recognized program is gone. Once again, it doesn't mean you can't use it if you want to. It also doesn't mean that you can't revitalize it if later on you feel that we need to. Item number 7. Dance programs are updated every 2 years. Changes shall be slow and deliberate. To maintain the stability that we need through this change process, if there is going to be one, they've got to be slow. We can't come in at one convention and hack 9 calls out of a dance program. It just won't work, not in today's environment. And number 9 is a key element. It defines or says that every dance program, at least the 2 entry dance, the first 2 programs, the entry dance program and the subsequent program prior to advanced, must be taught in a single dance season. That controls the size of that program. It's a controlling statement. It's a controlling policy. It controls the size, the overall size of a dance program, and limits it to a teaching season, which again will be defined by the committee. And that's the last sentence of that paragraph, that the definition of a teaching season for a given program is determined by that dance program's committee. Now, the resolution will be prefaced with some whereases and therefores on Wednesday morning. And one of the whereases, and I should say the therefore, will read, oh, he's got my copy. Let me just paraphrase it, all right? That if this resolution is adopted, the Board of Governors and the Executive Committee is directed by the general membership to implement it. And that means that the Board of Governors and the Executive Committee is going to have to give direction specifically to our dance program committees to see to it that the dance programs comply with this program, this policy statement. You've heard discussions this morning about the short-term situation, the short-term plan. This is it. We need to put this baby to bed. We've got to tuck this thing in and put it to bed. Our dance programs have to be stable. They have to conform with whatever's currently being danced out there and called by the callers. And then we can put the whole question of dance programs aside and concentrate on some of the other major issues that have come up before you this particular convention, that of marketing our entire program. So that's in a nutshell now, and then believe me, it is a nutshell, because, hey, here is what the correspondence on this project looks like, okay, over 2 years. emails and everything else. And I got another book just like it in my bag. So it's not a small issue, it's an important issue. If we can agree with these policy statements, and I strongly advise you that we can live with this, we can stabilize our dance programs for the next 10 years and not worry about that while we concentrate on marketing. Is this going to cure all the problems of square dancing? No. No, it won't. It gets rid of a problem that we've had trouble dealing with since 1977. The problem is, are we satisfied with our dance programs? Do we have the tools that we need to go out and promote square dancing? It puts that question aside so we can concentrate on some of the other problems that we have, some of the other challenges of marketing our activity. Will there be a direct result, something immediate, something I can feel and take home to my people like Wednesday? No, there won't be. But I guarantee you that when these committees start working, if the total teaching time is a problem and it takes too long to teach mainstream, that will be immediately addressed in the committee. If you're not in that committee, get yourself on it. Just a simple matter of stopping Georgie or anybody on the staff and saying, I need to be on the mainstream committee. I need to be on the plus committee. That's where it's going to happen. Any changes to our dance program is going to be there. I've got something to say. I need to be on that committee. I also want to remind you that as a responsible committee person, you need to reply to all correspondences, and that the organization has a policy in place that people who do not correspond, when correspondence comes their way, after 3 failed correspondences, they're dropped automatically from the committee. Doesn't mean you can't get back on. It's just a way of reminding you that we need to hear from you. That we don't want to... 2. I'm sorry. 2. I said, oh, true. 2. 2. Why did I think it was 3? 3 strikes, you're out. But you can get back on. All you need to do is just correspond. And why is that important? Why do we have to have a policy about that? Because you can't leave these decisions into the hands of the few. We need these decisions to be made by the many. They're too important. They affect our activity that much. Now, I'd like to open the floor up for comments. I've been making a lot of them here, but I see we've run out of time.
Don't steal all my parts.
Okay. Hi, Kip. Andy Shore from Mountain View, California. I feel that you're being a little disingenuous or schizophrenic about BASIC, because you've still used the phrase that people can stop there in their teaching if they want. They can use the BASIC program. But if this becomes the policy of CALLERLAB, there is no more BASIC program. It's where it ends and the rest of mainstream begins is no longer charged to that committee. There's no teaching order for it that's supported by CALLERLAB, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's ironic that as I look down the schedule, the first session after this one that mentions any program at all is this afternoon's using the BASIC program. You know, you can't have it both ways. Are you really advocating essentially the obliteration of BASIC or not? It's got to be one or the other, and I want to hear what it is that this Program Policy Committee is advocating. And sort of looking a little further forward, if what we really want to do is make a more marketable product, is the obliteration of BASIC really what we want to do? Or you know, we're obliterating one of the one-a-day choices of our menu if we do away with BASIC as a possible entry level.
Thanks, Andy. I'd like to take a moment before I take another comment to acknowledge Larry Davenport. I understand you're in the back of the room somewhere, Larry? There he is, Chairman of the Plus Committee. Thank you, Larry. Your choice of words is interesting. Obliterate. I don't believe that that's the intention of this policy. The intention of this policy is to establish a construct in which all dance programs can be formulated and managed. We believe that because the BASIC program has failed to be used to any extent in the United States for the last 25 years, that there's a real good possibility that it should suffer natural attrition. That is, if it hasn't already. That is, if there's somebody out there that absolutely has to use BASIC, go ahead and use it. But
what is BASIC after this policy goes into effect? What is it?
What is it now?
What do you want it to do?
What is it now? Let's not get into one-on-one on this, but let me just explain how the committee came to this particular conclusion. Nobody out there using BASIC? Does it have to be a defined program? What's the complication? There are just too many dance programs prior to advance. Is that a judgment call? Might be, but we don't think so. Because if we have a program out there that no one's using, why is it there? Now, the program itself is kind of an abstract definition. All we're doing is we're taking these calls that are all part of the mainstream list, and we're stopping there and saying after 52, bam, that's basics. Before 52. After that, it's mainstream. All right, but really, the way we've used this program in the past has been mainstream, which we use as jumping off point at, I believe it's 52, is that right? 53, and we call that the basic program. It's never really been a program. We had a committee. The committee died. Not only did the program fail to be used, but the committee evaporated. No one even knows where that went to. But it was absorbed into the mainstream committee, and that's why you see it listed as basic/mainstream committee. So yeah, we're advocating the fact that we're putting the cards on the table, and we're saying, hey, if we have to get rid of a program, basic is the obvious choice. Let's see if it'll die. Oftentimes with calls that we wanted to get rid of, one way to stimulate use of the call is to suggest it be dropped. Then everybody starts using the darn thing. So if everybody decides they're going to leave here Wednesday morning and show that PPC what it's all about, how the cow ate the cabbage, we're going to go out and start a basic program. Hey, you get my total support. What I know is that if you decide that BASIC is a viable program, this construct is going to work to control how it's managed and how it's structured.
Am I next?
Actually, I think we should probably switch to the rear mic and alternate. That'd be fair.
Okay. I'm Joe Vell from Las Vegas, and my question is, it's a question and a comment. I appreciate the history lesson because you filled in a lot of blanks for me as far as how these programs were developed. Now, to extend it a little farther, how are the calls, how were the calls and how are the calls going to be chosen for each program? Because my concern is that in the past it appeared to me that calls were removed from either plus or mainstream, and then there was nothing to fill in for the advance and challenge. And it appears, I've always thought of them as building blocks for each level that, as the dancer progresses up. So my question is will it be addressed at mainstream, then moved on to plus as each call is reviewed, whether they drop it or add it?
Your answer is yes. The calls are already in place. You need to understand that. No one is going to take these lists and change them tomorrow. That's not going to happen. What we're saying is we're going to take our existing mainstream program as is and define it as the entry dance program. And the second program is going to be plus, as is, and that's going to be the second dance program. And then we're going to take a look to see whether or not these two programs fit the policies that we've decided on. Can they be taught in a single dance season? Are they too big or too small in that regard? That's what we're going to do. Then if calls need to be shifted around, they'll be shifted around within each committee. If mainstream decides they've got too many calls and they want to shave off 4 or 5, they have to sit down together as a committee and agonize over which 4 or 5 calls are going to be dropped.
But will you pass them on to, after mainstream and plus, say they decide they do not want a particular call, will they then automatically pass on to the advance and challenge to review and see if they want to maintain the call?
We already have that procedure in place. It's been very successful for us, and we'll continue to use it. The answer is yes. Any call that gets dropped in an earlier program is a candidate immediately by any subsequent program for inclusion into their particular program.
This ends the front side of your cassette.
First, I will commend your committee on taking a tough job on, and I think, it's close. But there are 3 things in here that I guess make my blood pressure kind of go up a little bit. And I'm going to start with what I think is perhaps the most obvious one. If last night, about 9 o'clock, you heard a scream, it wasn't somebody being eaten by a lion over at the Circus. It was when I hit number 5. Now, it says callers are required to teach dance programs completely and thoroughly. Now, if you know anything about me at all, you will know that I absolutely, completely agree we should teach every dance program completely, thoroughly, and I would add accurately. I have no problem with that. It is one word in that sentence that just makes me very upset, and that is the word required. I don't work for CALLERLAB. As much as I would like Kip Garvey to be my father, maybe, he isn't. I'm an electrical engineer. I belong to other professional organizations in the engineering field, and I don't think I have ever seen any of those organizations use the word members are required. If they have, it is only in the limited concept of required perhaps to subscribe to a code of ethics or something of that nature. As a professional organization, we should be encouraging people to experiment. We should be encouraging dissent. We should be encouraging new ideas as long as they don't interfere with the basic activity. Please say callers are strongly encouraged to teach dance programs. Any words you want almost, but don't say required. That's point one. Going back to number 2, and you've hit on this one, I understand, where it says the first dance program is the entry program designated for dancers who first enter into modern Western square dancing. At an earlier session just before this one, our marketing people pointed out the example of the one-a-day vitamins, and they have a product called One-A-Day, but they also have 15 products called One-A-Day. We each personalize our programs. Each of us calls in a different area. And I realize that probably the majority, maybe even the vast majority of the people sitting in this room believe in your heart that mainstream should be that entry level. And I have no problem with you saying that and believing that and using it. But some of us are in parts of the country where that may not be true. Some of us may not even believe it should be true. That's not the point. We each should have the right to make our decision as to what is right. I make a big deal with my club that we have to pick a market segment and go after it. And the market segment we're going after is the young professional, the guy that sits at his computer screen every day. That guy doesn't view a class as a chore. He views it as an exciting activity. And he may want to go straight for plus. Leave us the choice that was voted by the membership of CALLERLAB in 1991 right here in Las Vegas. At that time, the recommendation stood and still stands that mainstream be the entry level, and I do not quibble with that. But the membership of this organization said that any level could be used as an entry level. Leave that in place. My final point actually goes back and relates to that, but it's also in number 5, the second sentence that says dancers are expected to learn the dance programs in the listed order. I guess if you're insisting we use mainstream, then I guess that's okay. But if we're going to use plus, and I happen to be one of the ones that was intimately involved with the LISST, and I have to correct you, Kip, at the state convention there was a problem, but the problem was only in the newer dancer hall for the January classes. This is an April convention. Those that were 3 months into the program, a very bad mistake was made that they said it would be set at the level that newer dancers in January would be at 3 months using the LISST. That should never have been done. It was corrected. There was a mainstream hall. The LISST was never a new program. It is exactly the CALLERLAB Plus program. But for those of us that are using and will continue to be using Plus as an entry level, we need the flexibility to do the right thing for our dancers. And that means we do not want to wait till the last 2 months of class or 3 months and teach all the Plus Club calls one after the other. We've seen that it doesn't work. I will not do it that way because it doesn't work. I want to graduate competent dancers that can have fun, and that means I have to start mixing those calls in earlier if I'm going to the Plus level. So please take that sentence out. I'd say delete that sentence. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks for those suggestions.
Bob Riggs from Denver, Colorado area. A couple of comments. I have a question, and it's aimed at the fact that this morning we listened to marketing, and we talked about it, and we heard a lot of comments there. I find it very fascinating that we're trying to bypass the definition of the CALLERLAB product, or define the definition of the CALLERLAB product, before we've even finished our marketing analysis, our marketing research. Defining a product is something that needs to be done as part of that. Understand the short-term nature of this. So the question is are we trying to circumvent the marketing? That's the question. The comment is I call to 10 times the number of what I would call entry-level dancers at the one-night stand and community dance levels and the basic level every year than I do what it would be considered a destination square dancer, i.e. mainstream and plus. I call mainstream and plus, but I call to 10 times the number of people. Is CALLERLAB not going to recognize in their products, in the offerings that they are providing, a offering to these people who are far more in population than the square dancer of today? Are we only looking to this shrinking population, or are we truly looking to the broad general public? Because I call to a huge number of people at the dance party, at the community party, at community dances that happen once a month, at clubs that dance Basic 50, etc. Thank you.
Okay, could I perhaps answer some of those questions? Because you did ask questions, and I think maybe everybody would like to hear an answer to some of them. The first question you asked was about the product. Are we not changing the product before we have a chance to define it? My personal response to that, this is not committee, but personal, is that the calls that we call are only part of our product. It's a substantial part, but they're only part of the product that we deliver in modern Western square dancing. Are we trying to change it? No, we're not. No one's advocating changing those calls. Those calls are still in place. No one has said to you, we're going to drop this or add that. So the calls are still there, and if you're talking about the calls as being the product, I can't see how you can assume they're being changed. They're not being changed. They're being reshuffled into different containers, if you will. Maybe. We don't know yet. Now let me address your second point, and then you can come back with a retort if you'd like. This policy is directed to modern Western square dancing, and specifically avoids dealing with questions of traditional dancing or contra dancing, line dancing, round dancing, or anything else. It's geared towards modern Western square dance programs. That's what it says right up top. So, yeah, you're kind of in a straddling situation where you're dealing with modern Western square dance programs a certain percentage of your time, and you're dealing with more traditional community dance type programs, or maybe even contra type programs, in another part of your time. But this specific policy deals only with modern Western square dancing programs. I hope maybe that'll answer your question.
I guess I would have to say that I disagree with the definitions, and we can agree to disagree.
Sure.
Because I consider what I do for the community dance program as modern Western square dancing. I do not consider it traditional in the pure sense of traditional, and so it's a disagreement of the definition and the extent of the definition. But I disagree that we limit. Circle left is part of modern Western square dancing. It is part of traditional square dancing. It is. And the other point I wanted to, as I turned back earlier, was I think in terms of programs being products, not calls being products. Because programs are sets of things that we offer our general public. And ultimately, the marketing people will come back and say, what are we going to market? What's the product we have to offer? And I hope this organization is offering more than the complexity of even a mainstream program.
I think we're up front now.
Yes, Jim Watts, Riverdale, Maryland. A little follow-on to that last one. The one-night parties I do don't have a fixed program, so I find it difficult to fit the idea of those things in this construct. Back to leveling out the programs. I can't remember what the terminology was exactly, but Bill Davis and Tony Oxendine did a conversation on the dais Monday morning of one of the conventions, I think it was that Pittsburgh, about leveling new program policy, trying to level out mainstream and plus, making them approximately 50 calls each, or at least half of the effort of teaching both of them together. Back then, I was against that, and I may have thrown a couple of bombs when the mainstream committee tried to delete 3 calls. I think that was the time where I moved to split the question. We wound up defeating all 3, because I didn't see how removing calls from mainstream was going to make it attractive to those who think that we need a plus vocabulary to have fun. And my question for you and the BOG is, how are we going to if we have this policy, how are we going to market it to the membership so Keith maybe won't use it, but maybe some of the others will decide, hey, that is a good idea to have a shorter entry level in my now that mainstream is down to whatever number of calls it reaches, whatever number of weeks of lessons it requires. So that's my question. How are you going? You can make all the program list changes, but if people are going to combine them together anyway into something else, what good is it, and how are we going to counter that? Thanks.
Combine them. Combining mainstream and plus. Okay. Okay, thank you. To clarify, his concern is, for the sake of the tape, his concern is how are we going to market this to the membership who feel a need to combine mainstream and plus, for instance, into a given entry program. Well, we don't have an answer that's going to be satisfactory for you. The only thing that we do have is moral suasion. That's all.
I just wanted to highlight that. That is maybe the biggest barrier.
That's going to be, it's going to be a barrier. There's no question about it. I have to live with it. I mean, I'm putting this down on paper knowing that I'm going to have to go back to California, which does not have any mainstream clubs. I have to requalify that. We have been rebuilding mainstream slowly in Northern California through a program we're calling Classic Dancing, which is simply a repackaging of mainstream. Our basic version of it, if you will, is called Classic Light. And we have found that we've had a lot of success. We've repackaged it. We're marketing it that way.
You're not going to do this thing that says, do it by this list, only this way.
Just a second now. I'll get to your point. And I'd like you to make it on the microphone, if you will, so that we can get it for the sake of the tape. It's important. Your comment is important. I'm going to go to my club. I've already done this already, and let them know that I'm no longer going to be teaching plus in a calendar year. And I've told them that if we have to alternate, have a beginner class that starts in September of the year 2000, that our next beginner class will not start until the September of 2002. Because I'm going to take the time to teach these people mainstream and to cultivate an interest in mainstream with my existing plus dancers.
That's showing leadership. Good luck with it, Kip.
Thank you. I'm not after any applause here, because believe it or not, I've made my way through this business by recognizing opportunities. The fact of the matter is, the plus dancers in Northern California that I deal with, they're liking our classic program. We're getting a lot of attention from our existing plus dancers coming out to our classic dancing and enjoying it. Coming out, moving to the music, rubbing shoulders with a different group of folks that they normally run with. And what we see happening in these classic dances that we don't see happening in our own club workshop is nobody's sitting out. They're all getting up to dance, and man, I'm getting like flashbacks from yesteryear. If we can somehow cultivate this, and I'm not sure exactly how it's going to be done yet, but if we can cultivate this, I honestly believe that we can redirect square dancing in Northern California. And hey, I might be out of work. When I tell my plus club it's going to take them 2 years, it's going to take me 2 years to get those dancers specifically up to their dance level, if you will. But that's the way I'm going to do it. I teach, let's see, in the last 3 years, I've taught 5 beginner classes. I'm involved in this. I do it a lot. And I'm concerned about it, equally with you. Does that mean I'm going to be able to convince somebody else to do it? Gee, I hope so. And if you want to listen, I'm going to put your back in the corner so you can't get away. I've got a lot I'd like to tell you about this. I think it can be done. I've had an epiphany. Did I answer your question, by the way? You asked me if I intended to do it. I told you what I intend to do personally. And if this policy is not accepted and we leave our programs exactly the way they are, I'm going to do it anyway, because that's what our programs tell us to do now. Yes?
Al Chalk, caller's wife from Eva, Hawaii.
It's a deep voice for it.
I'm concerned with our failure to recognize a current work environment which puts people on travel, puts people on shifts occasionally. A guy or a gal misses 2 or 3 classes and they're dead. I don't know what the solution is, but it's a problem we need to recognize.
I'm not sure that this policy statement addresses that specific issue. Not that the issue is not important, it is, Al. And I think that if this policy is put into place and we finally get back into the forums of meeting in our committee levels like we should, we can discuss things like that. There's no question about it. The contemporary society is a heck of a lot different than it was in '60. But the really interesting thing is we're still trying to teach the same number of calls that we were trying to teach 40 years ago. Someone needs to explain that to me. How come we haven't solved that riddle? How come we haven't done that? Yeah.
George Monaghan from Tustin. The bad news is I'm back in front of a microphone again. The good news is my questions are all rhetorical. As one of the 49 5/8% that hung on the cross on T2000, this looks to me like a very convenient patch to cover up and just completely whitewash all of the blood that was put out there on the sand by the people that were interested in the T2000 type of fix. And when you tell me that this is going to be an easy fix, whereas T2000 was going to rip the heart out of square dancing, I think that when you come right down, push to shove, the 2 or 3 differences that were the crux of the defense against T2000 were, what are you going to do with all of the plus dancers now? What are you going to do with all of the clubs that dance plus level? Who's going to go out there and tell those people that, hey, we don't care that you dance plus level as far as an entry level goes, this is going to be it, and you're going to have to live with it. And in California, we've already had the conversation about it. California Dances Plus, California is a dancer-run state. You want to work in California, you do what the clubs that pay you tell you to do, or they get somebody else that will. And whether that person is a member of CALLERLAB or not doesn't matter. Sooner or later, somebody will. So I think that, to me, along with, and I agree with going back to something, but I still see this entire thing in the long run as just a great big patch that doesn't solve anything. Okay, and as I said, it's all rhetorical.
Thank you.
Now I'm confused. I would like to...
What state are you from? Confused?
I'm in a state of confusion. My name's Tony Oxendine. I would like to speak highly in favor of this. And I don't like it 100%, and there were if I had my druthers, there'd be some changes. However, the changes that I like don't seem to be real popular, so I could care less what's on the programs. I figure if a caller does his job, you can call and entertain regardless of the calls that are on there. If it's mainstream, that's cool. If it's basic, that's cool. However, if it's plus, that's cool. However, I don't think any of us can be callers worth the flip if all we learn to do is call plus. Until you learn to work the programs underneath plus, you're never going to be as good as you could possibly be. I've seen that in the areas that dance primarily plus. That the dancers are never what they could mostly be because they never get an opportunity to really experience some of the other cool calls. And that's nobody's fault. It's not a situation of being a fault thing. I understand Keith's situation in California. The people do dance plus there. It's true in several other areas of the country. However, I'm seeing the problems in those areas, Northern California, Southern California, New England, and other, that their problems seem to be more amplified than in other parts of the country where plus isn't the destination level. If you want to keep that level, that's cool. This program will allow you to do that. It has nothing to do to address your concerns before. Your destination level's got nothing to do with what the folks are dancing now. It's not going to affect what the people are dancing. They can continue to dance wherever they want to dance because, as it stands right now, we're going to keep mainstream and plus. The only thing that's going to change is later on we're going to decide that there's going to be some type of switch as to how long what calls we're going to have in here and teach in one season. Whether it's going to be 40 weeks, 30 weeks, 20 weeks, I don't know. If I had my druthers, we'd have a program that we could teach in 20 weeks, and that would be what we would dance. And anything other than that, we'd throw in advance. That would be my druthers. Nobody likes my druthers. This to me is a good alternative. I can live with this as an alternative. So I would like to speak highly in favor of it, and we have an opportunity Wednesday to make this happen. In actuality, Wednesday either it will happen or it won't happen, and it'll be our choice. I think we made a mistake when we didn't approve T2000. I think it was a mistake, personally. Then again, but I don't want to make the same mistake twice. I see this as being a good thing for the activity. If we don't change something, if we stay dead center the way we've been staying, we're watching our activity go down and down and down and down. This is a change. It's off center. I don't care, frankly, I don't care if it's right or wrong. I think it's right, but for me it's a step off of center. So I think it's a good step. So I speak highly in favor of the motion.
Craig Shecker from Costa Mesa. In general, I'm in favor of this proposal as well, but I do have a couple of concerns I'd like to address. One of them is the levels, or the actual programs.
Programs?
Yes, let's not use levels. I see there's a list of the levels here. My opinion is part of our problem has been brought on by the fact that we have several levels that are much too small. And that encourages people to, rather than even going to class, just pick up the calls on the fly, and they never really do learn them. And they would be much better off actually being in a class where they did learn them and got to dance them for a while. It also encourages people to move up quicker. And I think, again, if the people would stay in a particular level for a longer amount of time, you'd see better dancers, and they would stick with the activity for a longer amount of time. Now, in my own opinion, I think A1 and A2 are also too small, and one of the things we might want to be working toward is increasing plus by taking some calls from the mainstream, some from the A1, and then eventually eliminating A1 and combining the rest of A1 with A2. Then you'd have more even levels all the way across, and they would all be something where the person would have to make a choice that, yes, I want to learn this next level, and actually go to a class to do it. Okay. Secondly, watching when one call leaves a list and goes on the other list, it seems to go out in limbo for a few years, and everybody says, well, what do we do with this call? I think there needs to be a smoother transition as far as being able to move from one level to another. And those are the things that I'm concerned about. Is this list that shows the levels, is that going to be a list ad infinitum or forever, or are we going to have the flexibility to perhaps do what I suggest, my suggestion? Not that that's necessarily the right one, but I mean...
Well, we always have that flexibility. There's nothing that we do that is so permanent that we can't change it later on if it's wrong. We just vote on it again, or we restructure it, and just like we're doing now.
Sure.
This process is a construct in which all our dance programs can be managed with a similar rationale. That's all we're looking for here. We're not trying to change calls. We're not trying to shift calls. We're not trying to redefine the programs. Actually, I have to tell you that in the course of our correspondence over the last 2 years, we agonized over everything, including the word required. We did strongly recommended, and we did all the other alternatives, and we decided, well, we're going to run this one by you because we've always strongly recommended since 1977, and our recommendations, for the most part, have fallen on deaf ears in a lot of cases. Let's require and see what happens. Do we have any sanctions? No. Is somebody going to tear up your plastic card and take away your BMI certification? I don't think so. But what we're saying is, this is a statement of being emphatic. We're going to say to callers, We want you to be good. We want your dancers to be good. We are requiring, from the viewpoint of a professional, that all callers teach thoroughly and completely. We want you to sit down and study what it is you're teaching people. And if you're teaching them correctly, we want to know how you're doing it so you can share these ideas with all of us. And we'll all become better for it. And furthermore, we're asking the dancers. We don't use the word required, but we're saying dancers are expected to learn the dance programs in the listed order. Now, we can change that listed order if we have to later on. We can add to it, subtract from it. But this is just a statement of reality. This is the way people learn, folks. They've been learning it this way since I've been involved in square dancing. People do learn the dance programs in the listed order. Yeah. And we're saying that that's proper. That's the way it should be as a matter of policy.
Actually, they don't.
Well, for the most part, they do.
Well, hopefully they do.
Yeah, for the most part, they do. Even the callers of Santa Clara Valley Callers Association this year voted unanimously.
No, not unanimously.
With one exception.
Not one short.
Three. Three to 23 was the actual count. 3 to 23 to use the LISST, which does in fact overlay mainstream and plus calls together.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to go back into the fact about calls going into limbo for a couple of years. Is there anything in the works to try to make, especially if we're talking about moving things from one level to another, is there anything in the works as far as making that a little smoother?
Yeah, thank you very much for mentioning that. That's really the responsibility of the PPC, one of our responsibilities. And when we try to avoid that, but in a lot of cases, we're caught between a rock and a hard place. When the membership votes to drop something, we can't just legislate where it goes. It has to be picked up by another committee. All we have to do is to try to keep it, everybody's attention focused on it until it gets picked up. Okay? Now, we have a lot of people that need to make statements, so, and I hate to cut you short, but please be brief. We're almost on 3.
Dawson Shuker from Northern California. To address the fact that BASIC is not mentioned in the list of programs, the plight of the basic dancers now cannot go dance at another program, yet dancers from other programs can support BASIC if they wish to. So let's suppose we add BASIC back. The plight of the basic dancer is the same. The basic dancers still cannot go dance at another program, yet dancers at other programs can support BASIC if they wish to. The point is that whether BASIC is mentioned as a separate program or not, the result is the same. Whether we list BASIC out separate or not, it makes no difference. So if after decades of division on the dance programs, we can't let it fall apart on an item that actually makes no difference. We came here to Las Vegas to do good for square dancing. Perhaps the greatest good we can do is to leave here united in unity and say we all have something we can live with, we can agree to, and it can happen right here on Wednesday morning. Let's see it happen.
Thank you. Up front.
Milt Floyd from Minnesota. A couple comments. I may be one of the minority because I still use a basic program. Mm-hmm. I also use a multi-cycle program, which makes the basic program more viable. And we have people in that program that will never go beyond basics, but they're happy to have a place to dance. And I fully support this policy, although I would like to see it basic/mainstream as the entry level. Let's don't lose that program entirely from our wording. It is a viable program, and we need to keep it.
Okay. Thank you. And back.
Mr. Garvey, Lloyd Sparks, Louisville, Kentucky.
Mr. Garvey is my dad. He's in Sandown, New Hampshire town clerk. Thanks for mentioning his name.
Good for you. I like the word required because even our engineer friend that spoke earlier in the meeting, he was required to take a test to get his degree. When you graduated from school as an engineer, you didn't get a degree? Okay, thank you very much. So we need to do some requiring to get some basic comments from for our callers. You know, I went over and bought a record, so now I'm a caller. We got no requirements. So our requirements is an important part of saying this because we need to train the new callers to teach properly. Secondly, if these people are doing one-night stands and they're getting so many people at the dance, why in the heck don't we have more dancers coming out of them? The third thing, how can we trust what you say, although I am for you with this, How can we trust what you say about getting a program when you stood up on the podium and then you told us that you're going to run a program your own way in California that's different than the one we've got now and different from what we're doing, and regardless of what we're going to do, you're going to do it.
No,
if we're going to be united, it's got to be you and all of us, not all of us and you separately.
I agree with that. I think what I want to point out to you is that what I've been doing has been different, not what I intend to do. Yeah, it's maybe a minor clarification, but I'll leave it at that. Up front?
I just want to bring something up that I haven't heard yet, but it's something I will defend square dancing with my last breath because I love it, and I love what it does for the people and how it makes the people feel. Okay? Having said that, when I took square dancing, all we had was square dancing, period. And we really enjoyed it. Okay? And then all of a sudden, Plus came along, and they put Plus on the floor and took mainstream off the floor on the first Friday night of the state dance, and I happened to be in New York State where I was. And it broke the heart. People didn't even look at their tickets. They used to just send their money in. And they came down, and there was no place to dance. I'll never forget that first year I went in. It was unreal. I actually had tears in my eyes when I walked out of there. I couldn't take it anymore for that night. But I still continue to do what I do today. But what I'm saying is this. Square dancing was for the masses. You went to Plus. How many people here learned how to waltz or any of those things at Arthur Murray's dance studio? No. You probably learned in a church social somewhere. Somebody taught it to you because it was for the masses, not for everybody. There was a need for Plus, don't get me wrong, but it should have been separate. A Plus club, just like we ended up with Advanced, and it would have flourished just as well as it does now. But it would have been for the people that really wanted it and really could handle it. Do you know how many of my compatriots agonized when they had to tell people that maybe they better look somewhere else? They couldn't go on square dancing because the club said they're holding you up? Okay, that's all.
We appreciate your comments, and I want you to go back to your chair and know that everybody in here has the same intense feelings about this activity as you do.
I'm sure they do.
We just don't all have the answers.
That's right.
And that's the toughest part. Hopefully, we can get some answers out of meeting here and other cities once a year and discussing these same things. Thanks for the comments. Down back, John.
Thank you. John Marshall from Virginia. I'd like to speak very much in favor of the policy change that we're talking about, and I think we're losing some focus. No one has said that we can't use part of the programs. People are saying we can't use basic, we can't use CDP, we can't use traditional. No one has said that. We're looking at the policy for the dance programs that CALLERLAB is identifying and saying, here is our entry program to dance mainstream. We didn't say this doesn't exist, that doesn't exist, that cannot be used. We're saying this for this program, this for the second program. And that's all we're looking for is a unification of that we can work for together. One point. Second point, and I know Kip tried to stress it, and I'd like you to stress it again, Kip, that's really equally important to all of this. Unless every one of us puts aside the fact that I know what's best for my area, I know what's best for my people, I'm going to do what I do regardless of what CALLERLAB says, we're sunk. We're never going to get off center. We're going to keep on spinning down. We have got to suck it up and learn how to do what we have to do. We have got to learn how to change. We have to learn how to do things differently, and that includes every one of us, whether we call challenge or CDP or anything in between. It doesn't matter. We've got to make the changes. We've got to be professional enough and leaders enough to learn how to make those changes and come on board. And if we don't do that, it's not going to matter.
That's correct. This comment I'm going to make goes beyond this policy statement, but I believe that it's true. Many of us have vacated our leadership role as callers, and we have chosen to take the easy way, to teach the way we always taught, to never investigate, to never study, never develop lesson plans. All of these hints I've been to CALLERLAB convention since 1977, and there hasn't been a convention that hasn't encouraged callers to do these things. And when I get out, travel around a little bit and see what's going on, I'm amazed at how many callers have a very casual attitude about their function and role in square dancing. That needs to change. And we can't legislate that. There's no policy we can give to it. We just need to tap each other on the shoulder and say, can I help? Will you help me? We need to exchange ideas, and we need to go out and do the things that need to be done to protect this precious activity. Rich?
Rich Kierman, Spreckles, California. I'm speaking on the issue of teaching season. A number of years ago, our local Callers Association dissolved, mostly from lack of interest, and with that dissolution, all of the external drives to be done with your teaching season, to meet goals on a periodic basis, disappeared. And what I've discovered is that I have a much higher retention rate of dancers now that I teach them in as much time as it takes to get them there. My classes are fun first and classes second, and the dancers keep coming back. The club members are once in a while come up and say, when are they going to graduate? And my answer is, when they're ready.
All right, there you go, Rich. Thank you. I've got one eye on the watch, and we will be out by 3. We've got 4 more people to make comments, and that's probably what we can do in the 6 minutes allotted.
Richard Reel, Northern California. I just wanted to say that I am here and I put my time and energy into CALLERLAB because I feel professionally and personally bound by the decisions made here. I wanted to make a very small modification to what you're saying, and I think may help address some of the problems. If we simply leave basic, mainstream, and plus define as they are today, but make a policy so that when one call is quote-unquote dropped from one level, it moves automatically to the next level. It is officially on that level. If that program does not want that call, they have to delete it or have to have it removed separately. So in effect, the committees would get together and decide whether to move the lines between the programs. And over the 10-year time period that you're talking about, I think the evolutionary change that people want by popular decision will move in the direction that you would like to go, or that the membership would like to go.
Thank you for the comment, and I know that someone would like to respond to that, but let me just say that that's, at first blush, it sounds like a great idea to have an automatic movement of calls where one drops it, the next one picks it up. But we found and we discovered that's a little dangerous. All right? We would want to preserve the autonomy of each dance program committee to make its own decision as to what the callers in that committee and who deal with that program can and cannot call. It might be bad, but we're fearful of the alternative, quite frankly, and what we really want to do, see, there's no reason why mainstream should decide to drop 3 calls and plus automatically get them. That's what we're afraid of. We need to have dialogue there. We want to encourage dialogue rather than to make it automatic. Yes.
Frank Figel from Cologne, Germany, so please excuse my English. I want to make a statement that BASIC should be left on the list for some more things. One thing is, in the club I call for, there are a lot of people I think that would be happier with BASIC, and not only with my club, but with other clubs in our area. So our local caller association decided that we should graduate all people BASIC when they are at that level, and later on move on to mainstream level. And we are trying to set up a BASIC club in our area. So because there are some people like sociality and they like moving to the music but not mental exercise, and I think they would be very happy with BASIC. That might be one product. And also, if you drop BASIC, well, you can't advertise it on any flyer anymore.
And down back, thank you.
Michael McMullen from Portland, Oregon, and just to speak on the viability of BASIC as an entry level, I think that has to do with how we've packaged BASIC in the U.S. Has anybody ever seen BASIC calls without the mainstream calls? If what you get is a list that BASIC is the first 2/3 of mainstream, you're going to teach all the way through mainstream and use mainstream. If you get a list that says BASIC Mainstream Plus, that must be the entry program. If you publish just the BASIC calls, people will stop there and be happy with it.
Thank you. Up front?
Clark Baker from Belmont, Mass. I had several points I wanted to make. The first is that the purpose of the standard programs is mainly for dancer mobility. And you know that you have a program when you graduate dancers of that program, and they can go to conventions and have halls and go to other clubs that advertise the same programs. For the programs like the one-night stands and CDP, we don't really need to standardize anything. I don't think people would be happy if we suddenly came up with these CALLERLAB standard one-night stand. I mean, you don't need a standard there. So I think that's why those don't appear on this particular policy. I think for the people who are worried about losing BASIC, we already have people who need to do dancer mobility at places that aren't just, for example, mainstream. When you run a beginner's dance and you've just gotten into November or December, people advertise a BASIC 33. And if you wanted to continue that kind of thing, you could advertise under the new scheme, for example, a mainstream 33 or a mainstream 51 to let people know what calls are going to be used in a hall. And that would be a way to keep the people who know BASIC and want to go someplace and dance. If that was successful and kept happening and happening, maybe you give it a name. If not, it'll slowly fall by the wayside. And finally, I've been very upset when I've been at CALLERLAB and attended the PLUS meetings and watched the voting happen in the voting years. And I'm hoping that this policy will address some of that. Basically, we drop calls because we feel a pressure to make PLUS smaller for the people who teach nothing through PLUS, either consecutively or in some mixed order, because that's too much for them to teach. And yet an area which maybe teaches mainstream in a year and PLUS in a year, they're making their PLUS smaller. So we're trying to serve too many masters there, and we're not making our decisions for any rational reasons that anyone can explain. When you go home and they say, well, why'd you drop these calls? The answer is everyone just kind of voted on stuff and no one had any reasons of why things were too big, too small. We just knew we had to make it smaller so we could make it easier to learn. So in summary, I'm certainly in favor of this proposal and think it'll be a good step forward.
Okay, one more. I think we can take that back, Mike.
All right. Bengt Gillip, Sweden. I want to shock all you people here. We teach BASIC in Sweden, and we just added an extra term to it. So that means we got 3 times 13, 3 hours each for BASIC. That's all we do. BASIC 35 is an entry level by us. So just think about it, guys. I'm glad with it I can use mainstream 35 as an entrance. I don't need the word BASIC, but that's where we stop.
And that's great. And there's nothing that precludes you from continuing to do that with this policy in place. Yes. And that is a good point. I want to let you all know, because we're running out of time, and I should have one more comment from Ron. Ron, can you make it brief, please?
It is a great deed that you are doing. It is a great honor to know that CALLERLAB is finally catching up with my program introduced 7 years ago. As you leave, please take one of my brochures with you. I think you'll find it interesting.
And before you